I used to think heirlooms were just props rich families used to pretend they had souls. Stuff you dust once a year, drag out at holidays, tell the same tired story about how great granddad crossed the Atlantic with nothing but grit and a prayer. Ours sat in a climate controlled display case in the east wing of my parents' house. Yes, east wing, I know how that sounds. And none of us really questioned it. It was just there. A carved wooden chest about the size of a carry-on suitcase, inlaid with tarnished silver vines and a lock that hadn't been opened in decades. My grandmother used to joke that if we ever cracked it open, the house would collapse or a curse would spill out. We laughed, drank expensive wine, moved on. That was before we found out strangers were willing to kill for it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because nothing about this story is clean, and pretending it started with the chest would be a lie. I grew up in a version of America people either idolize or hate on. Gated community, private schools, parents who said things like optics matter and we don't air our laundry. On the outside, we were untouchable. Inside, we were a pressure cooker of resentment, secrets, and money used as emotional duct tape. My father made his fortune in logistics and acquisitions, boring on paper, brutal in practice. My mother curated her life like an Instagram grid before Instagram existed. Perfect dinners, perfect smile, perfect silence when it mattered. I was the middle child, which in families like mine basically means emotional furniture. My older brother, Marcus, was the heir apparent. My younger sister, Elise, was the brand. Beautiful, sharp, and already married into more money than God. I was the observer, the one who noticed things, the one who learned early that listening was safer than talking. The chests belonged to my mother's side of the family. Old money. Not tech, not oil, European banking roots, the kind people whisper about. It supposedly came over during World War II, hidden among personal effects. That was the official story. No one ever explained why something that supposedly held sentimental trinkets needed a lock that looked like it belonged in a museum vault. No one asked, because in our family, curiosity was seen as disrespect. Questions implied distrust, and distrust was a crack in the foundation. Everything changed the night my father collapsed at the dining table. It was a Tuesday, which matters because Tuesdays were informal dinners. Just immediate family, no guests, no staff hovering. My mother insisted it made us normal. We were halfway through a meal that probably cost more than my first car when my dad reached for his water and missed. His glass shattered. Red wine soaked the white linen. He tried to speak and nothing came out. Elise screamed. Marcus froze. My mother went eerily calm, already issuing instructions, already managing the narrative. I remember staring at my father's face and realizing how old he looked in that moment, how fragile. He survived the stroke, but the man who came home weeks later was not the man who left. Power leaked out of him like air from a punctured tire. That's when the vultures started circling. At first, it was subtle. Increased calls from advisors, distant relatives suddenly eager to reconnect. My mother became territorial about information, guarding my father's condition like it was proprietary data. Marcus stepped in, took meetings, made decisions he technically wasn't authorized to make yet. Elise stayed quiet, which for her was suspicious. And me? I started noticing unfamiliar cars near the gate, people asking questions that didn't line up. One afternoon, a man in a tailored gray suit approached me at a charity gala and casually asked if our family had any artifacts of historical significance. He said it like he was asking about the weather. I laughed it off. He smiled like he knew something I didn't. 2 weeks later, the chest was gone. Not stolen, removed. Carefully, cleanly. The display case was unlocked, the alarm temporarily disabled. Whoever did it knew the house, the systems, the routines. My mother found the empty case and didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at it for a long time and then told the staff to leave the room. When she turned to us, her face was pale, tight. She said, "No one outside this family hears about this. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded immediately. Elise avoided my eyes. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. You don't react like that over a sentimental box. The official story was that the chest had been moved for appraisal, insurance reasons, temporary relocation, but nothing about the situation felt temporary. Security doubled. Lawyers started showing up unannounced. My father, who barely spoke anymore, asked one night in a strained whisper if they had found it. My mother told him everything was under control. He didn't look convinced. I did what I always did. I listened, and then I snooped. It started with old emails on a shared family server Marcus forgot I had access to, then physical files tucked behind false bottoms and desk drawers, then a safety deposit box my mother assumed no one knew about. Piece by piece, a different story emerged. The chest wasn't just an heirloom, it was a container for documents, originals, proof of transactions that were never supposed to see daylight. During the chaos of post-war Europe, my great-grandfather and his associates had brokered deals between governments, private collectors, and very dangerous people. Art, gold, identities. The chest held ledgers, signatures, seals, a paper trail that connected modern fortunes to crimes everyone preferred to forget, crimes that, if exposed, would dismantle entire dynasties. And apparently, people had friendly noticed. The first direct threat came in the form of a polite letter, no return address, heavy paper, elegant handwriting. It congratulated our family on safeguarding a piece of shared history and expressed interest in ensuring its preservation. There was an offer, 8 figures, cash, no taxes. My mother burned the letter in the fireplace and told us it was nothing. Marcus agreed. Elise asked what would happen if we said no. My mother said, "We already have." After that, things escalated fast. A break-in at Elisa's vacation home in Aspen. Nothing taken, just drawers opened, bed sheets disturbed. A warning. My father's medical records leaked online, twisted into rumors of dementia. Our stock took a hit. My mother started drinking earlier in the day. Marcus got sloppy, snapping at staff, making reckless moves. And through it all, strangers kept circling, sniffing around the edges of our lives. Historians, collectors, consultants, all pretending this was about cultural preservation, all lying through perfect teeth. I confronted my mother one night when I found a scanned copy of one of the documents. It had names I recognized, corporations still in business, families still powerful. I asked her how much the chest was worth. She laughed, sharp and humorless. To us, she said, everything. To them? She paused. Millions, maybe more. Enough to rewrite history. Then she did something I'd never seen before. She begged me to stop digging. That's when I realized the scariest part wasn't the strangers. It was my own family. Because while we were busy closing ranks, pretending this was about legacy and honor, deals were being made behind closed doors. Loyalties were shifting, old grudges resurfaced, and somewhere in the middle of all that, the chest, our heirloom, had become a loaded gun sitting on the table, and everyone had a different idea of who deserved to pull the trigger. I didn't know who had taken it or where it was hidden or how deep the betrayal went. I just knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever was inside that chest, it wasn't meant to stay buried anymore. And when it finally came out, someone was going to lose everything. Once you know something is wrong in a rich family, you can't unknow it. It's like smelling gas in a mansion. Everything looks pristine, but every breath feels dangerous. After my confrontation with my mother, the house shifted, not physically, energetically. Doors closed more softly, conversations stopped when I entered rooms, smiles stayed a beat too long. Everyone was playing chess, and no one was telling me whose side I was on. Marcus was the first to crack. He started calling me late at night, voice low like we were teenagers sneaking beer again. He kept asking what I'd found, how much I knew. I told him enough to be worried. He laughed, said I was being dramatic, then immediately asked if I'd checked the Zurich accounts. That slip told me everything. He was already moving money, positioning himself, preparing for an outcome where the family didn't come out clean. In families like ours, you don't ask if the ship is sinking, you start negotiating lifeboat space. Elise went the opposite direction. She leaned into the performance. Charity events, magazine features, a glowing spread about resilience in the face of adversity that mentioned my father's health but not the growing scandals. Her husband, Nathan, a hedge fund prince with dead eyes and impeccable posture, started showing up to family meetings he had no business attending. He never spoke unless spoken to, he just watched. I caught him once staring at the empty display case like he was doing math in his head. The strangers got bolder. A woman approached me outside my gym, designer leggings, too perfect blowout, accent I couldn't place. She knew my name, knew where I'd gone to school. She said she represented private European interests and that the chest's contents were not as exclusive as my family believed. She implied copies existed, that what we were protecting wasn't uniqueness but leverage. She offered me a deal separate from my family. Protection, money, a clean exit. I told her to fuck off. She smiled and said, "You'll be back." I threw up in the locker room 10 minutes later. That night, I checked the house security logs. Not the surface level stuff my mother monitored, but the back end. There were gaps, entire windows of time wiped clean. Someone had administrator access, someone inside. I traced it back to a secondary system used during renovations years ago. Guess who had overseen those renovations? Marcus. Guess who had insisted on hiring a private firm instead of our usual security company? Marcus. My stomach dropped. Betrayal is one thing. Premeditated betrayal is another. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed proof and leverage. I started meeting people I shouldn't have known how to find. Retired archivists, art restitution lawyers, a journalist who'd been chasing Nazi-looted art cases for 20 years and still slept with one eye open. I never gave them names, just hypotheticals. Every conversation pointed to the same conclusion. The chest was a nuclear bomb disguised as a keepsake. The documents inside didn't just prove theft, they proved collaboration, voluntary transactions between respectable American families and war criminals, the kind of truth that doesn't just cancel people, it restructures economies. And people like that don't let go of power quietly. The first real attack happened on a Friday afternoon. I was driving back from the city when a black SUV boxed me in on the highway. No plates, tinted windows. They forced me onto the shoulder. Two men got out. No masks, confident. One of them asked me if I'd reconsidered the offer. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He leaned in, tapped my window, and said my father's rehab center had very lax night security. Then they drove off like we'd just chatted about the weather. I sat there shaking until a state trooper pulled over to ask if I was okay. I said yes, another lie. When I got home, the house was in chaos. My father had fallen, or been pushed. The story kept changing depending on who you asked. My mother clung to him like he was already gone. Marcus was on the phone barking orders. Elise cried beautifully in Nathan's arms. No one noticed me standing there processing the timing, the threat, the message. Cooperate or we escalate. That night, I broke into my mother's private office. Behind a false panel, I found what I'd been looking for, correspondence, not just recent, but decades old. My mother hadn't just inherited the chest, she'd managed it, controlled access, decided who knew what. She wasn't a bystander in this legacy, she was the gatekeeper. And in the most recent file, I found something that made my hands shake. A signed agreement between her and Marcus, dated 3 months before my father's stroke. It outlined contingency plans, asset transfers, and one line that chilled me. In the event of external pressure, priority will be given to individual futures over collective reputation. They'd planned to sell it, not to the highest bidder, to the safest one. I confronted my mother at dawn. She didn't deny it. She looked tired, old. She said she'd done what she thought was necessary, that the world wasn't black and white, that my father's health had forced her hand. I asked her if Marcus had taken the chest. She hesitated. That was answer enough.
I went to Marcus's house that afternoon. He didn't act surprised to see me. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey like this was overdue. I asked him where it was. He told me it was secure. I asked who else knew. He said fewer people than before. I asked how much they'd offered. He named a number that made my ears ring. I asked what he planned to do after. He said survive. Then he looked at me and said, "You should be thanking me. I'm saving us." I laughed. It came out ugly. I told him he was selling our family's soul to people who'd burn it down anyway. He shrugged, said morality was a luxury, said if I wanted justice, I should have been born poor. That's when I told him I had copies. The color drained from his face. I didn't, not yet, but he didn't know that. I told him if the chest changed hands, the documents went public. Journalists, courts, congressional hearings. I told him I'd already laid the groundwork, that I'd ruin him before I let him profit. He stared at me for a long time, then smiled, slow, calculated. He said, "You really think you're the only one with leverage?" The next morning, my bank accounts were frozen, every single one, and my name was trending for reasons that had nothing to do with heirlooms. That's when I understood the real game had begun.
When your accounts get frozen, you learn exactly how thin money makes you. One day, you're insulated by numbers on a screen. The next, you're calling your credit card company from a burner phone, explaining you're traveling, and yes, the charges are yours. Please just unlock the damn account. Mine stayed locked. Fraud investigation, compliance review, all very official, all very engineered. Marcus hadn't just pulled strings, he'd yanked the whole web. My name trended for 48 hours straight. Allegations, not crimes. Sources close to the family. A whisper campaign dressed up as accountability. Accusations of insider trading, conflicts of interest, ethical concerns. Enough smoke to make sponsors nervous. Enough to isolate me without ever filing a charge. Elise posted a vague Instagram story about truth surfacing in its own time. Nathan liked it. I screenshotted everything. Petty? Maybe. Useful? Definitely. I went dark. I moved into a short-term rental under a friend's LLC. Cash, no trace. The kind of place rich people forget exists. Clean, anonymous, no soul. From there, I worked like I'd never worked before. I wasn't trying to save the family anymore. That illusion died the moment Marcus weaponized my identity. I was building a kill switch. The journalist I'd been dancing around finally got the full picture. Not names, yet, but structure, patterns, proof of concept. He went quiet for 3 days, then called me and said, "If even half of this is real, people will go to prison." I asked him what it would take to make it undeniable. He said, originals, or a confession, preferably both. So I went hunting. I followed the money first. Marcus had moved assets through a web of trusts that looked sophisticated until you zoomed out and noticed the repetition. Same shell managers, same offshore addresses. Sloppy for someone who prided himself on being clean. Fear makes people arrogant. I found a private storage facility outside the city registered to one of those shells. Climate-controlled, high security. The kind of place you hide things you don't want in your house but don't trust to leave the country. I didn't break in. I waited. Patience is easier when you've already lost everything. The call came from my mother. She didn't ask where I was. She asked if I was safe. I told her that depended on who she was talking to. She sighed and said Marcus had cut her out, that the deal was moving forward without her, that she'd underestimated him. For the first time in my life, she sounded small. She asked me what I planned to do. I told her the truth. "Burn it," I said. She didn't argue. She just said, "If you do this, there's no coming back." There never is, I thought. That's the point. I met Marcus at the storage facility 2 nights later. He thought he was meeting his buyers. European accents, conservative suits, private jet waiting. He didn't question why the meeting was delayed or why the air felt wrong. He was too busy rehearsing his victory. I watched from across the lot as he keyed in the code, opened the unit, and stepped inside. That's when the lights came on. Real lights, cameras, federal badges. He didn't run. Marcus was never a runner.
He argued, threatened, tried to negotiate. I stayed back, unseen, as they cataloged the contents of the chest. Originals. All of them. Ledgers, contracts, seals, names that would make headlines bleed. Someone asked who tipped them off. An agent said, a concerned party. I smiled in the dark. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Raids, subpoenas, trading halts. The journalist published a story so airtight it didn't need adjectives, just facts. Elise deleted her social media. Nathan's fund collapsed in a week. My mother resigned from every board she sat on. My father watched the coverage in silence, eyes wet, then reached for my hand and squeezed once. Approval or forgiveness. I didn't ask which. Marcus took a plea. He tried to reach me from custody. I didn't answer. Some conversations expire. The strangers disappeared. The threats stopped. The money, what was left of it, untangled slowly. I cooperated fully. Immunity in exchange for access and transparency. It wasn't painless, but it was clean. For the first time, the truth didn't belong to the highest bidder. The chest now sits in evidence, stripped of mystique. Just wood and metal and paper. Ugly, ordinary, dangerous. I thought that would be the end. I was wrong, because justice has a long memory, and ours wasn't done collecting.
People think justice is loud. Courtrooms, headlines, someone in cuffs getting shoved into the back of a black SUV. That part is flashy, sure, but the real justice, the kind that actually changes you, is quiet and slow and personal. It's waking up months later and realizing the world didn't end when your family's name did. It just stopped lying to you. After Marcus took the plea, everything went still. No more reporters outside the gates, no more anonymous numbers lighting up my phone. The kind of silence that feels earned, not ominous. The government did what governments do, sealed some things, buried others, paraded a few high-profile convictions to prove the system worked. It didn't work, not fully. It never does. But enough truth leaked out to permanently stain the families who'd spent generations laundering their sins through philanthropy and legacy admissions. My mother moved into a smaller house by the coast. No staff, no board meetings, just ocean and consequences. We talk now, carefully, honestly, in ways we never did before. She admitted she'd believed control was the same thing as protection, that by managing the chest, she was managing history. She was wrong. History doesn't stay managed. It waits. Elise filed for divorce 6 months after Nathan's indictment. No statement, no explanation, just papers. We ran into each other once at a courthouse hallway, two strangers with the same face and very different regrets. She told me she wished she'd been braver. I told her bravery shows up when it does or it doesn't. Neither of us smiled. My father didn't live to see the final sentencing. He passed quietly before the estate was fully unraveled. At his memorial, there were fewer people than I expected, fewer speeches, more silence. Someone asked me if I felt like we'd lost everything. I said no, we lost the lie. Big difference. As for me, I didn't get rich off the truth. That was never on the table. After fines, settlements, and restitutions, what remained was modest, livable, clean. I took a job I could explain at a dinner party without watching people do mental math. I sleep better. I answer my own phone. Sometimes I think about the strangers who wanted the chest, the collectors, the private interests. I imagine their frustration when the leverage evaporated, when the thing they thought they could own became public record. There's a specific kind of rage that comes from losing power you never legally had. I hope they felt it. The chest will end up in a museum someday, probably behind glass, stripped of its secrets, labeled with neutral language like provenance dispute and historical context. Visitors will walk past it without knowing how many lives it poisoned before the lock ever turned. That's fine. Not every story needs an audience. Some just need an ending. People still ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd kept my head down, let Marcus sell, taken my cut, and disappeared. I tell them the truth. There are nights I miss the ease, the insulation, the way money used to smooth over fear. But I don't miss the wait. I don't miss wondering who I'd become if I stayed silent one more time. The heirloom was never really ours. It was a debt, and like all debts, it demanded payment, just not in the currency my family understood. Justice didn't make us whole, it made us honest. And for the first time in my life, that feels like enough.